Did you ever wonder what really happens behind the cameras of a hit show? Not the scripted drama, not the carefully edited lines, but the truth, the messy, unfiltered reality that no one is supposed to talk about. Today, we're peeling back the curtain on Meghan Markle, the woman known to millions as a duchess, a former actress, and a public figure whose every move has been scrutinized. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But what if I told you that her life on the set of Suits was far more scandalous, far more shocking than anyone ever imagined? That even the cameras couldn't capture the kind of chaos she left in her wake? And that's someone very close to the production. The show's creator himself, Aaron Korsh, has now finally revealed the things no one dared speak aloud. Picture this. A glamorous set in Toronto, bright lights, endless scripts, and a cast and crew who are supposed to work together, laugh together, and create magic for the cameras. It all looks perfect on the surface, but behind that polished exterior, tensions simmered, rumors swirled, allegiances were tested, and in the center of it all, according to Korsh, was Meghan Markle, charming, ambitious, and dangerously intimate with nearly everyone on set. The allegations are explosive, and they come from someone who has had a front-row seat to the entire production. Why does this matter now? Because Meghan is no longer just Rachel Zane from Suits. She is a global icon, a duchess, and a figure whose every word, every gesture, and every relationship is dissected in the public eye. And as her royal persona grows, so too does the curiosity about her past. Every revelation about Hollywood culture, every anecdote from former colleagues, every secret once buried under scripts and spotlights suddenly feels relevant. It's not just about gossip. It's about understanding how fame, ambition, and power collide, and what happens when the lines between professional and personal boundaries are blurred beyond recognition. Let's start at the beginning. Suits was a powerhouse. It wasn't just a show, it was a phenomenon. Fans loved it, critics praised it, and the cast became household names. But on set, according to insiders, a very different story unfolded. The cast wasn't just acting. They were navigating a minefield of secrets, whispers, and unspoken rules. And Meghan, at the center of it all, wasn't just acting either. She was living a reality that the cameras would never capture. Aaron Korsh, the show's creator, watched it all unfold. For years, he kept quiet, a professional maintaining the illusion that all was well. But now, with the distance of time and the weight of reflection, Korsh has begun to speak. He's revealed stories that are hard to believe, stories that paint a picture of a young actress who wielded charm and influence in ways that left lasting impressions, both positive and negative, on everyone around her. Some called her magnetic, others called her manipulative. And according to Korsh, the truth was somewhere in between, tangled in a web of ambition, desire, and Hollywood's unspoken rules. The thing about Hollywood is that it thrives on appearances. Cameras, lights, and scripts create a narrative, but the reality behind the scenes is often darker, messier, and far more complicated. Relationships form quickly and break just as fast. Alliances shift in a heartbeat. And for someone like Meghan, who was ambitious, intelligent, and determined to rise, the set became a stage not just for acting, but for negotiation, for influence, and for connection in ways that went far beyond professional lines. You might ask yourself, was this really different from any other Hollywood set? Sure, actors date, rumors fly, and gossip is part of the culture. But Korsh's claims suggest that what happened on Suits was exceptional. The intimacy, the interactions, the way Meghan navigated power dynamics. It wasn't just casual flings or workplace crushes. According to Korsh, she formed connections with nearly everyone, creating an environment where boundaries were blurred and everyone was aware of the undercurrents. This isn't just a story about Hollywood romance. It's a story about influence, perception, and the way one person's actions can ripple across an entire production. Let's pause for a moment and consider the stakes. Meghan Markle's image today is meticulously crafted. Every public appearance, every speech, every interview is calculated and analyzed. The contrast between that polished royal persona and the intimate stories from a decade earlier is staggering. It challenges everything we think we know. It forces us to reconcile the glamorous Duchess with the ambitious actress navigating a high-pressure, high-stakes environment where ambition and charm can be powerful tools and dangerous ones. Now, think about the people around her. Co-stars, crew members, producers. Each person had their own perspective, their own experiences, and their own secrets. What it looked like on the outside was cooperation, camaraderie, and professionalism. What it looked like behind closed doors, according to insider accounts, was a labyrinth of attraction, tension, and occasionally betrayal. And in the middle of it all was Meghan, whose actions, intentional or not, left an imprint on everyone she interacted with. Aaron Korsh's decision to speak publicly is not just about gossip. It's about providing context, revealing how Hollywood works behind the polished cameras, and, in his words, telling the story as it happened. He emphasizes nuance, reminding us that the people involved were navigating complex social dynamics, career pressures, and personal ambitions. But even with nuance, the revelations are shocking. They force a confrontation with questions we might not want to ask. How much do we really know about public figures? How much of the persona we admire is constructed? And what happens when ambition and intimacy intersect in ways that challenge professional and personal boundaries? Here's one anecdote Korsh shared that captures the essence of the tension. On a quiet afternoon, a scene was being shot that seemed innocuous. Two characters exchanging dialogue, a moment of laughter, nothing extraordinary. But behind the cameras, the dynamics were anything but simple. According to Korsh, Meghan had a way of engaging with her co-stars that was charming, persuasive, and at times intimate in ways that caught everyone off guard. Crew members noticed. Co-stars noticed. And even the production team had to navigate the undercurrents with care, aware that the ripple effects could touch every part of the set. And this is only the beginning. Over the course of this story, we'll delve into the casting secrets that never made it to public attention, co-star confessions that have remained private for years, and the hidden diary entries of Aaron Korsh that reveal the moral and emotional dilemmas faced by the team. We'll explore how rumors turned into undeniable realities, how the set's atmosphere shifted, and how the fallout affected careers, reputations, and even the trajectory of Meghan's life. Each revelation will challenge assumptions, raise questions, and keep you guessing about what really happened behind the bright lights and cameras. So why watch this story unfold now? Because the distance of time allows us to see patterns, connections, and consequences that were invisible in the heat of the moment. Because Meghan Markle's current life, her public persona, and the narratives constructed around her are inseparable from her past experiences. And because Hollywood's culture, its pressures, and its moral ambiguities continue to fascinate us and to shock us when they collide with fame, ambition, and personal choices. How much of Hollywood's glitz is real, and how much is an illusion? On paper, Suits was the dream job. Bright lights, a bustling set, A-list crew, and a cast that became instantly recognizable. Cameras rolled, scripts were memorized, and audiences around the world fell in love with the perfect chemistry, witty banter, and sleek wardrobe. But what happened behind the cameras was far messier. The truth, as Korsh would later reveal, was that the set was a pressure cooker of ambition, desire, and personal agendas. For Meghan Markle, Suits was more than just a job. It was a stepping stone, a platform, and an arena where her charm and intelligence could operate freely. But that freedom came with consequences. Every interaction, every smile, every subtle glance had weight. The young actress learned quickly that Hollywood was a game where influence often mattered more than talent, where connections could open doors, and where one misstep could close them forever. Aaron Korsh observed her closely. He saw the charisma that drew people in, the way she could make a scene partner feel special, the way she could command attention without ever raising her voice. On the surface, she appeared professional, diligent, and friendly. Behind that professionalism, however, Korsh noticed patterns of intimacy and influence that went far beyond what was typical on a network set. She connected with people in ways that were deeply personal, sometimes uncomfortably so, and often left subtle ripples of tension behind. Co-stars who later spoke to him admitted that Meghan had a presence that was magnetic, but that magnetism was complicated. Some found themselves flattered, others unsettled. Some saw an ally, others a competitor. The duality was dizzying. And for a director, trying to manage not just the show but the human dynamics of the cast, it was exhausting. Every day brought new challenges, managing egos, ensuring scenes stayed on track, and navigating the undercurrents of attraction and rivalry. The tension was especially palpable during downtime between takes. Casual conversations in makeup trailers, late-night script read-throughs, or coffee breaks could spiral into charged moments of flirtation or whispered secrets. Korsh recalls a scene where a minor rehearsal suddenly became a spectacle, not because of the lines or the blocking, but because of the chemistry off-camera. One co-star confided later that it was impossible to separate performance from reality because Meghan blurred those lines seamlessly. And then there were the rumors. Every production has them, but on Suits, they moved fast. Whispers of affairs, of favoritism, of someone getting too close to multiple colleagues floated across the set. Some dismissed them as typical Hollywood gossip. Others noticed patterns that couldn't be ignored. Korsh had to decide when to intervene and when to let natural dynamics play out. But he also had to keep production on schedule. The weight of these unspoken realities added an invisible layer of stress to every scene. Despite the tension, the magic of the show persisted. Audiences loved it, critics praised it, and the ratings soared. But the duality of Suits, the polished screen and the turbulent backstage, was a reminder that appearances can be deceiving. For every perfectly shot scene, there were hours of emotional navigation, delicate diplomacy, and subtle strategy. And at the center of it all was Meghan, whose actions and choices shaped not just her character, but the very atmosphere of the set. Yet Korsh was careful to note the nuance. Meghan was not malicious. She was ambitious, aware of her influence, and unapologetically strategic. She understood the environment she was in and used it to her advantage. But the consequences, sometimes positive, sometimes disruptive, were felt by everyone. Crew members described moments of awe, moments of frustration, and moments of silent resignation when they realized just how much her presence could alter dynamics. In one particularly revealing anecdote, Korsh recounts a table read that went off script in an unexpected way. Lines intended to be professional became charged with tension. Meghan's interactions with certain co-stars created a ripple that echoed through the crew. Some laughed nervously, others exchanged glances, and the energy in the room shifted palpably. For Korsh, it was a lesson in control. How charisma and connection could influence not just scenes, but the emotional environment of an entire production. But it wasn't just the cast who felt the impact. The crew, often overlooked in public narratives, experienced the intensity firsthand. Lighting technicians, makeup artists, production assistants, everyone navigated the same charged atmosphere. Allegiances were tested, friendships strained, and gossip circulated in quiet corners. Korsh himself had to mediate disputes that weren't part of any script, handling both professional obligations and human complexity with care. Some co-stars later described the set as a chessboard, with Meghan moving strategically, aware of how each interaction could be leveraged. Not every move was calculated, but the effect was undeniable. She had an ability to make people feel seen, to draw them in, and to create bonds that were simultaneously personal and performative. Korsh saw this firsthand, and it influenced how he directed scenes, managed rehearsals, and addressed conflicts. Yet the irony was striking. The show's polished, controlled surface presented a narrative of order, professionalism, and cohesion. Behind that surface, the reality was fluid, unpredictable, and, at times, volatile. The juxtaposition between what audiences saw and what Korsh observed was stark. He often reflected on the nature of performance, not just for the cameras, but for each other, and how it affected relationships, trust, and workplace dynamics. And amidst all this, Meghan's ambitions loomed large. She wasn't content to be a supporting figure on a popular show. She wanted influence, recognition, and trajectory. She sought to create connections that extended beyond the script, beyond the scene, beyond the stage. Some welcomed it, others resisted. But everyone noticed. Her presence left an indelible mark. One that would shape not just Suits, but the professional and personal stories of everyone involved. By the end of the first season, patterns were clear. The tension, the connections, and the subtle manipulations had become part of the set's identity. Korsh watched as relationships formed, alliances shifted, and conflicts simmered beneath the polished veneer. He realized that the magic of Suits wasn't just in the script. It was in the human drama that unfolded behind the cameras, where ambition, charm, and intimacy collided in unpredictable ways. And yet, there was one moment, one encounter, that would define the set for years to come. A moment that encapsulated the duality of Meghan's presence, the complexity of Hollywood, and the delicate balance between ambition and chaos. What happened next would shock even those who had grown accustomed to the undercurrents of tension. It was a reminder that in the world of fame and influence, no secret stays hidden for long, and no action is without consequence. What happened that day on set? What shifted the balance of power and tension? And how did Meghan navigate the aftermath while continuing to rise, charm, and influence those around her? The answers are coming, but they are more astonishing than anyone could have imagined. Have you ever wondered what it's like to watch chaos unfold while you're supposed to be in control? To be the person responsible for keeping a production together while the very people you depend on are caught in a storm of desire, ambition, and secrecy? That was Aaron Korsh, creator and director of Suits, during the height of Meghan Markle's tenure on the show. And now, after years of silence, he's finally speaking out. Korsh's revelations are not easy to digest. They're not convenient. They challenge the narrative of a polished set, a charming cast, and professional decorum. According to him, the first signs of unusual behavior weren't immediately obvious. Meghan was professional, charismatic, and capable. She could deliver a scene flawlessly, earn applause from the crew, and charm her co-stars in ways that seemed innocent on the surface. But beneath that veneer, subtle patterns emerged. Patterns that hinted at a more complicated dynamic, one that Korsh had never encountered before in his career. It started with small interactions, moments that seemed trivial but hinted at deeper complexities. A lingering glance, a hand on a shoulder that stayed a second too long, private jokes exchanged behind closed doors. Korsh noticed these little details, and while they could have been dismissed as typical workplace banter, the frequency and intensity were unusual. Other co-stars began to comment, quietly, in whispers. Some laughed it off, others felt uneasy, and slowly, the pattern became undeniable. Korsh had a choice. He could ignore it, let it pass, and focus solely on production. Or he could acknowledge the reality, confront it, and risk disrupting the delicate ecosystem of the set. What he chose is telling. He observed, documented, and reflected. He didn't rush to judgment, but he couldn't deny what he was seeing. And eventually, the patterns converged into a story he could no longer keep private. The first allegations, according to Korsh, weren't about scandal in the typical Hollywood sense. They weren't tabloid fodder. They were about influence, intimacy, and how personal dynamics affected the entire production. Meghan had a way of forming connections that transcended simple friendship or camaraderie. She was attentive, engaging, and disarmingly charming. Co-stars found themselves confiding in her, seeking her validation, or responding to her subtle cues. It wasn't always overt, but the effects were palpable. Then came the tipping point. Korsh recalls a specific incident during a rehearsal in Season 2. It was meant to be routine, a table read, a moment to run lines. But the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Meghan's interactions with multiple co-stars simultaneously created tension that was impossible to ignore. One actor later admitted he felt manipulated, though not necessarily in a malicious sense. Another confessed to feeling conflicted, flattered yet disturbed by the intimacy of the exchanges. And for Korsh, the situation crystallized into a clear pattern. Meghan's personal influence was crossing boundaries, blurring the line between professional and private interactions. What made these allegations so compelling and so difficult was the combination of charm and ambiguity. Meghan didn't coerce, manipulate aggressively, or create conflict for the sake of drama. Her actions were subtle, calculated, and often wrapped in humor or flattery. Yet, their cumulative effect was undeniable. The cast and crew were affected, morale shifted, and the dynamics of the set were altered in ways that couldn't be undone. Korsh describes it as a slow, creeping influence that changed how people interacted, how trust was negotiated, and how scenes were performed. The director also reflected on the ethical dimension. How do you handle a situation where someone is talented, charismatic, and essential to the show, but whose personal interactions create emotional and professional turbulence? Korsh faced a moral dilemma: protect the production, maintain professional boundaries, and safeguard the well-being of the cast and crew. At the same time, he had to balance the fact that Meghan was navigating her own ambitions, relationships, and social awareness. The complexity was staggering. Then there were the confessions from co-stars who finally spoke in private to Korsh. They revealed details that were shocking, even to someone who had witnessed the subtle undercurrents firsthand. According to Korsh, Meghan's relationships on set weren't isolated or casual. They were widespread, forming a web that touched nearly every key member of the production. Some co-stars described moments of vulnerability, attraction, or curiosity that had been influenced by her presence. Others admitted to feeling manipulated or strategically charmed. The cumulative effect, Korsh emphasized, was an environment where intimacy and professional interaction were indistinguishably intertwined. What makes these revelations more than just workplace gossip is the consistency across multiple accounts. Korsh cross-referenced observations, anecdotes, and private conversations. Patterns emerged. Meghan was consistently engaging, consistently forming connections, and consistently leaving behind subtle ripples that changed the emotional landscape of the set. It wasn't haphazard, it was systemic, and it affected everything: rehearsals, on-camera chemistry, even the morale of those behind the scenes. Korsh also addressed the public perception. To audiences, Meghan was Rachel Zane, the smart, ambitious, likable character whose romance with Mike Ross was a central storyline. The public never saw the tension, the undercurrents, or the private dynamics that unfolded each day. But behind the polished exterior, every choice, gesture, and interaction carried weight. It wasn't just about acting. It was about influence, perception, and power. Korsh's revelation is critical because it offers context. It explains how one individual's presence can shape an entire professional environment, for better or worse. Some might ask, does this make Meghan manipulative or malicious? Korsh's answer is nuanced. She wasn't scheming in a malevolent sense. She was aware, intentional, and ambitious, using her personal and professional tools to navigate a high-stakes environment. That awareness, however, had real consequences for those around her. Emotions were stirred, relationships were tested, and the set itself became a microcosm of ambition, desire, and ethical complexity. And then there's the most explosive aspect of the allegations. According to Korsh, Meghan's personal interactions were not limited to one or two colleagues. They were widespread. This created a ripple effect that was difficult to contain. Intimacy became normalized in ways that blurred professional boundaries. The director recalls moments when he had to intervene subtly, redirect interactions, and maintain order, all while understanding the complexity of human behavior under pressure. Korsh's eventual decision to speak publicly was motivated by reflection and distance. Years had passed, emotions had settled, and the impact of those interactions had become clearer. He emphasized that his goal is not to malign, but to provide insight into the environment, the dynamics, and the choices that shaped one of television's most popular shows. The revelations are uncomfortable, provocative, and undeniably compelling. But they are also a window into the human complexities that fuel Hollywood productions. As Korsh explains, the first allegations were only the beginning. Once the cast and crew realized the patterns, whispers became conversations. Conversations became confessions. And the truth, messy, complicated, and undeniable, began to surface in ways that could no longer be contained. What started as subtle influence evolved into a series of intimate interactions that left lasting impressions, affected relationships, and reshaped the atmosphere of the set. But here's the twist. These revelations didn't just affect the people on set. They also influenced the show's creative process, the portrayal of characters, and the emotional resonance of scenes. Korsh noticed that certain interactions, chemistry, and subtle tension enhanced performances, but also carried risks. The duality was constant. A moment could be brilliant on camera and destabilizing off camera. That tension is at the heart of Korsh's account, the intersection of art, ambition, and human behavior. And as these first allegations came to light, It became clear that the story of Meghan Markle on Suits was not just a story about acting, fame, or career ambition. It was a story about the ways intimacy, influence, and charisma can shape an environment, affect everyone involved, and leave consequences that endure far beyond a single season. Portia's revelations are a lens into that world, a world that audiences never saw, but that determined the shape, tone, and drama of one of the most successful shows of its time. But just when it seemed like Portia's disclosures had painted the full picture, something even more astonishing came to light. Something that challenged everything he thought he knew about Meghan, her intentions, and her interactions on set. A discovery so shocking that it would force him, and everyone involved, to reconsider the narrative entirely. And that, my friends, is where the next chapter begins. The secrets hidden in the casting process, and the moments that were never meant to be revealed. Have you ever wondered what really happens during casting in Hollywood? The glittering red carpets, the polished headshots, the confident walk into an audition room. It all looks glamorous from the outside. But behind closed doors, casting is a battlefield. It's a world where ambition collides with opportunity, where charm can outweigh talent, and where personal dynamics often influence decisions in ways that the public will never see. And according to Aaron Korsh, that battlefield on Suits had a secret at its very center: Meghan Markle. The casting process for Suits was already high stakes. Hundreds of hopefuls applied for every role, each bringing talent, drive, and a dream of stardom. For the main cast, auditions were meticulously organized. Every line, every pause, every inflection was scrutinized. But as Korsh recalls, Meghan brought something different to the table, a combination of talent, charisma, and a magnetic energy that made her impossible to overlook. She wasn't just another auditionee. She commanded attention, drawing eyes, reactions, and even subtle admiration from casting directors, producers, and other actors waiting their turn. But there was more to it than skill. Korsh observed that Meghan had an instinct for reading the room. She knew how to position herself, how to make a subtle connection with anyone in authority, and how to use her presence to create opportunities that others could only dream of. She was strategic without being overtly calculated, persuasive without being aggressive. And while some of these qualities are admirable, in the world of casting, they can also be disruptive. Sources close to the production described an energy on set that was electric, yet unpredictable. Auditions for new characters sometimes became tense, charged with more than just professional evaluation. Korsh noticed that Meghan's ability to connect personally with co-stars, crew, and even casting assistants created an unusual dynamic. People wanted to be around her. They wanted to impress her. And that created ripple effects, not only on the casting floor, but on the morale and psychology of everyone involved. There were whispers early on, subtle enough that many dismissed them, but persistent. Some crew members wondered if the attention Meghan received was based purely on talent, or if there was something more. She had a way of engaging people, establishing a rapport that was intimate without being inappropriate, yet undeniably influential. Over time, these interactions began to shape casting decisions, whether consciously or unconsciously. Korsh observed that casting directors and producers were more inclined to see potential in actors who had Meghan's attention, or conversely, to avoid conflict with someone who could influence the mood of the set. The tension intensified as filming progressed. Scenes that should have been routine became laden with unspoken subtext. Actors, aware of Meghan's influence, found themselves performing not just for the camera, but for her approval. Some admitted that they tailored their behavior, their delivery, even their appearance to gain her favor or to avoid subtle disapproval. This is a side of Hollywood few ever discuss openly, but according to Korsh, it was a real and consistent pattern on the Suits set. What made the situation even more complex was the overlapping layers of ambition. Meghan's colleagues were not passive participants. They were talented, driven individuals navigating their own career trajectories. Some tried to establish boundaries. Others embraced the dynamic, seeing opportunity where there was influence. And all the while, Korsh had to manage the integrity of the show, the performance of the cast, and the emotional well-being of everyone on set. Every casting decision, every rehearsal, every line read carried weight far beyond what the public would ever imagine. Korsh later revealed that certain casting choices were influenced, in part, by Meghan's interactions. He emphasized that she never explicitly demanded anything, nor did she overtly manipulate. It was the subtlety of her presence, the way she engaged with people, and the impressions she left behind that created a new reality. Co-stars noticed, crew noticed, and even those not directly involved felt the shift. It was an invisible force that changed how people interacted, how decisions were made, and how trust and loyalty were negotiated. Behind-the-scenes accounts also paint a vivid picture of how competitive the environment became. Actors auditioning for minor roles found themselves caught in a web of perception and influence. Some were encouraged by Meghan's attention, feeling validated and supported. Others were intimidated, unsure of how to navigate interactions without appearing inappropriate or disrespectful. Korsh observed that this dynamic shaped the culture of the set in profound ways, affecting morale, focus, and even the flow of scenes. One revealing anecdote involved a new actor auditioning for a recurring role. According to Korsh, the audition went smoothly on paper, but Meghan's presence in the room altered the energy. The actor, nervous yet eager, found themselves distracted by subtle cues, smiles, glances, laughter, that shifted the emotional context of the performance. Korsh described it as a powerful gravity field, one that Meghan didn't overtly create but that everyone felt. It was mesmerizing, disorienting, and undeniably influential. Even beyond casting, the impact extended to rehearsals, read-throughs, and social interactions on set. Crew members described moments where they had to recalibrate their expectations, adjust their professional approach, and navigate interpersonal dynamics carefully. Directors, producers, and actors alike were aware that Meghan's energy was a factor not just in her own performance, but in how others performed, reacted, and interacted. And then there were the rumors, the quiet, hushed stories that floated through trailers, lunch areas, and makeup rooms. Some dismissed them as typical Hollywood gossip. Others noticed patterns that could no longer be ignored. According to Korsh, these rumors were not entirely accurate, but they contained kernels of truth. Meghan's influence was pervasive, her connections widespread, and her presence transformative. People were drawn to her, affected by her charm, and at times, caught off guard by the intimacy of her interactions. Korsh himself admits that managing this dynamic was exhausting. He had to maintain professional boundaries, ensure the integrity of casting decisions, and preserve a functional work environment, all while navigating the subtle, powerful presence of one of his most important actors. It was a delicate balance, and one that required constant attention, reflection, and judgment. But just when it seemed the casting process had been navigated successfully, a series of events occurred that revealed the full extent of the influence. Minor conflicts escalated, whispered secrets became topics of discussion, and previously hidden dynamics came to light. Korsh recalls moments when the tension was so palpable that it threatened to derail rehearsals, delay shooting, and affect on-camera chemistry. He realized that casting wasn't just about talent. It was about navigating the human element, the relationships, and the subtle power plays that Meghan had become masterful at orchestrating. And yet, amidst all this, the irony was striking. Suits was a show about law, strategy, and negotiation, yet the real drama, the one that had lasting impact, was happening off-camera, in the nuanced, intimate exchanges between actors. Casting, of all things, became a microcosm of the entire set, a place where influence mattered as much as talent, where charm could shape opportunities, and where one person's presence could ripple across the entire production. But even Korsh could not have predicted what came next. As these casting secrets began to surface, one event crystallized the patterns he had observed for months. A revelation that confirmed the whispers, validated the observations, and shocked even those who had grown accustomed to the behind-the-scenes tension. What happened in that moment would force the entire cast and crew to confront the reality of Meghan Markle's presence on set. A reality far more intimate, influential, and pervasive than anyone had imagined. Have you ever wondered what it's like to carry a secret for years, watching it shape your workplace, your relationships, and even your own choices? That's what life on the set of Suits became for many of Meghan Markle's co-stars. For the audience, she was Rachel Zane, ambitious, charming, professional, and captivating. But behind closed doors, the story was far more complicated. And now, for the first time, several of those co-stars are speaking out, revealing a side of Meghan that the cameras never captured. The confessions start with small details, offhand comments, late-night exchanges, moments of subtle intimacy. One co-star, who asked to remain anonymous, described how Meghan had a way of making every conversation feel personal, as if she were the only person in the room who truly understood you. You'd think it was innocent, the co-star recalled. You'd think it was just charm. But then you realized she wasn't just talking. She was observing, gauging, learning. And suddenly, everyone was under her spell. Porsche noticed it too. He observed the way actors responded to her presence, the way crew members adjusted their behavior, and the ripple effect that her interactions created. Some admitted to feeling flattered, others uncomfortable. Some felt motivated to perform better. Others felt manipulated, subtly drawn into dynamics they didn't fully understand. The co-stars' confessions reveal the emotional tension that underpinned the set, a tension that no script could convey. One particularly striking confession came from a recurring actor who had been on set for several seasons. He recalled an evening rehearsal where Meghan engaged in what seemed like harmless banter, joking and laughing with multiple colleagues at once. But then she pulled a line of questioning. Just small comments, subtle observations, he said. It made you reveal things about yourself you didn't intend to. She wasn't just socializing. She was connecting on a level that caught you off guard. It's important to note that these interactions weren't overtly aggressive or explicitly sexual in the traditional sense. They were subtle, layered, and psychologically compelling. Meghan had a way of establishing intimacy that blurred lines without crossing legal or overt ethical boundaries. And that is what made her influence so potent. Co-stars found themselves drawn into conversations, confidences, and subtle competitions, sometimes without even realizing it. Other confessions paint a more dramatic picture. Some actors described moments where professional collaboration became entangled with personal attraction. Scenes that should have been straightforward suddenly carried an emotional charge, influenced by the underlying tension. According to one co-star, it wasn't about seduction. It was about presence. You couldn't help but feel pulled in, aware, and somehow involved in a story that wasn't on the page. Porsche emphasizes the nuance in these confessions. He stresses that Meghan's behavior wasn't about malice or deliberate manipulation. She was ambitious, charismatic, and aware of her surroundings. She knew how to navigate social dynamics, establish connections, and command attention. But the cumulative effect of her interactions created a charged environment, one that affected every layer of the production. Some co-stars admitted to feeling conflicted. They admired her talent, her charm, and her work ethic, yet they were unsettled by the intimacy she cultivated. The emotional spikes, the subtle psychological games, and the pervasive presence made it difficult to maintain a sense of professional distance. Porsche recalls mediating situations where actors were unsure whether to speak up, pull back, or engage further, decisions that carried real consequences for their careers and relationships on set. And then there were the revelations about specific moments of intimacy. Some actors described private conversations that turned unexpectedly personal. Others recounted situations where physical proximity, casual touches, gestures, shared laughter, carried an intensity that unsettled the room. These interactions, though subtle, left impressions that persisted, shaping dynamics long after the scene was shot. The co-stars' confessions also reveal a pattern of strategic influence. Meghan was aware of how to position herself in group dynamics, how to leverage attention without seeming forceful, and how to navigate the social hierarchy of the set. Actors found themselves competing for her approval, consciously or unconsciously adjusting their performance or demeanor in response. Porsche notes that this kind of influence is rare, even in Hollywood, and that it created both opportunities and challenges for everyone involved. Yet the confessions are not uniformly negative. Many co-stars acknowledge that Meghan's presence elevated the energy of the set, inspired better performances, and brought a level of sophistication and charisma that was undeniable. The tension, while challenging, also contributed to the show's magic. Scenes became more nuanced, relationships on screen more believable, and the production more dynamic. It was a paradox. Her influence was disruptive, yet it also enhanced the very show she was part of. The emotional complexity of these confessions cannot be overstated. Actors describe feelings of admiration, frustration, confusion, and even fear. They recount moments where they laughed with her, shared private confidences, or felt inspired by her drive. But they also remember moments of discomfort, unease, and the sense that boundaries were fluid. Korsh observed all of this, taking careful notes, trying to balance the production and protect both the cast and the integrity of the show. And then there is the cumulative impact. When multiple actors independently describe similar experiences, a pattern emerges. It's no longer a series of isolated anecdotes. It's a web of interactions, influence, and intimacy that shaped the set in profound ways. Korsh recalls the moment he realized the scope of it. A private conversation here, a subtle gesture there, repeated across months and seasons, creating an invisible network of emotional and social influence. Perhaps the most startling confession comes from an actor who described the pervasive awareness of Meghan's influence. It wasn't just about who she liked or interacted with, they said. It was about who felt seen, who felt ignored, and who suddenly realized they were part of a dynamic they couldn't control. We all adapted, sometimes without even knowing we were adapting. This acknowledgement underscores the psychological complexity of her presence. It wasn't coercion, manipulation, or overt impropriety in the traditional sense. It was subtle influence amplified by charisma, intelligence, and social skill. Korsh emphasizes that understanding this requires nuance. Meghan's actions had real consequences, but they were wrapped in layers of charm, professionalism, and social perception. The confessions also reveal that the intensity of these dynamics escalated over time. Early interactions were casual, sometimes playful. As seasons progressed, the patterns became more entrenched, more visible, and harder to ignore. Actors began to recognize the influence as systemic rather than incidental. Korsh himself describes the shift as a turning point, the moment when charm and presence became a force that shaped not just individual relationships, but the entire environment of the set. By the end of these confessions, a picture emerges of a set defined by subtle tension, emotional complexity, and strategic influence. Meghan's interactions, while not overtly malicious, created an environment where every conversation, every glance, every gesture carried weight. Actors navigated this environment constantly, adjusting their behavior, performance, and perception in response. And Korsh, observing it all, realized that the magic of Suits was inseparable from the human drama that unfolded behind the cameras. But just when it seemed the confessions had revealed everything, an even more explosive revelation surfaced. A series of private encounters, moments of intimacy, and subtle manipulations came to light, details that even Korsh had not fully anticipated. These revelations would challenge everything the cast thought they knew, reshape their memories of the set, and leave a lasting impact on everyone involved. What happens when the person tasked with orchestrating a hit show becomes both witness and reluctant participant in a web of drama too complex for the cameras to capture? For Aaron Korsh, Suits was more than a show. It was a living, breathing organism shaped by the ambitions, desires, and interactions of everyone on set. And what he recorded in his private diary during those years has remained hidden until now. Korsh began keeping notes not as evidence, not as a diary for future revelations, but as a way to process the daily chaos of production. Each day brought its own challenges. Actors' emotional swings, unexpected tensions, subtle shifts in alliances, and the undercurrent of influence emanating from Meghan Markle. His diary entries were candid, unfiltered, and at times, brutally honest. They provide a glimpse into a side of Hollywood that no one sees, one where charisma, ambition, and intimacy collide in ways that can redefine a workplace, and, in this case, a beloved television show. One of the first diary entries that stands out describes the initial realization of Meghan's pervasive influence. Korsh wrote about a rehearsal where everything should have gone smoothly. The lines were memorized, the blocking rehearsed, the actors prepared. Yet, something in the room shifted. Meghan's presence subtly altered the energy. She engaged multiple co-stars simultaneously, balancing charm, attention, and subtle psychological cues that drew everyone into her orbit. Korsh noted, "I've never seen an actor command attention this way without saying a word, just by being." He continued to document similar occurrences over weeks and months. Small details, who sat where, who laughed at which comment, who shared a private glance, were meticulously recorded. Korsh's entries reveal that these interactions were not isolated. They formed a network of influence that spanned the entire cast. And it wasn't just social, it had professional implications. Decisions, performances, and even the morale of the crew were influenced by this invisible web. Some entries are shocking in their candor. Korsh admits to moments of admiration for Meghan's skill. She was observant, strategic, and undeniably talented. But he also confesses frustration, noting that her subtle manipulations often left him walking a tightrope. "I had to manage production, maintain professionalism, and yet navigate an emotional minefield that seemed to shift daily," he writes. One wrong move, one misjudged glance, and the delicate balance could tip into chaos. Korsh's diary also captures the ethical dilemmas he faced. How do you maintain boundaries while recognizing the influence one actor has over an entire set? How do you guide performances without becoming entangled in personal dynamics? How do you ensure fairness in casting, rehearsal, and scene execution when emotional undercurrents are constantly in play? His notes reveal the weight of responsibility, the sleepless nights spent considering consequences, and the constant mental calculation of how best to maintain both integrity and functionality. The diary entries take an even darker turn when Korsh describes the escalation of tension as the show progressed. By the second season, Meghan's influence had become systemic. Interactions that were once subtle now carried weight in every corner of the set. Co-stars adjusted their behavior, sometimes consciously, often unconsciously. Crew members felt the ripple effects, and Korsh, as the director, was acutely aware that these dynamics could not be ignored. He writes about moments where he had to intervene delicately, redirect energy, or provide subtle guidance to maintain equilibrium. One particularly striking entry details a scene that went completely off script, not because of dialogue, but because of the interplay of emotions off camera. Korsh observed Meghan engaging multiple co-stars in private conversations, subtly testing reactions, and gauging influence. "It was mesmerizing, infuriating, and exhausting all at once," he wrote. "I realized then that her presence alone could shift the tone of a scene, for better or worse." The entry underscores how her personal dynamics were inseparable from her professional impact, a fact that would challenge Korsh and the entire production team repeatedly. The diary also documents the co-stars' perspectives. Korsh notes which actors felt flattered, which felt intimidated, and which were unsure how to navigate the unspoken rules of engagement. These observations are crucial because they illustrate the layered consequences of Meghan's influence. Her charm and attention were double-edged, inspiring for some, destabilizing for others. And the tension created by these interactions contributed to both the magic and the strain of the show. Another recurring theme in the diary is the contrast between public perception and backstage reality. To audiences, Meghan was Rachel Zane, the poised, talented, and professional attorney in training. But the diary entries reveal the intense complexity behind that persona. Every smile, every laugh, every casual touch was layered with nuance, sometimes intentional, sometimes instinctual, yet always impactful. Korsh notes, "What the cameras see is a fraction of the story. The real drama unfolds in the spaces between scenes, in the subtleties of human interaction." Korsh also records moments that highlight Meghan's strategic awareness. She understood the power of perception and influence, often guiding interactions in ways that advanced her presence without overtly manipulating. The diary entries show a young actress navigating the high-stakes environment of Hollywood with skill and awareness, yet leaving a trail of subtle chaos in her wake. Crew members and co-stars alike were affected, often without realizing the extent until later. One of the most revealing entries describes a private conversation with a co-star who confessed discomfort with the intensity of interactions. Korsh writes, "They didn't accuse her of wrongdoing, but they admitted to feeling manipulated, subtly drawn in, and unsure of where boundaries lay. This, I realized, was the complexity of her presence. An invisible force that shaped behavior without overt control. The entry underscores the psychological sophistication of Meghan's interactions and the challenges faced by everyone around her. The diary also captures Portia's personal reflections, moments of doubt, and moral conflict. He questions his role, the fairness of his interventions, and the broader implications for the show. Could he maintain professionalism while acknowledging the subtle power dynamics at play? Could he protect both the cast and the integrity of the production without overstepping? These reflections humanize the director, showing the weight of responsibility behind the scenes. And then there are entries that hint at the more intimate aspects of the set's dynamics. Without naming names explicitly, Portia describes situations where personal relationships intersected with professional obligations, creating tension, attraction, and occasional conflict. He notes that Meghan's interactions were widespread, affecting multiple colleagues in ways that were subtle but significant. These entries provide the most direct insight into the allegations of intimacy and influence that would later become public. But perhaps the most astonishing element of the diary is how it captures the evolution of these dynamics over time. Early seasons show subtle influence, curiosity, and charm. Later seasons reveal a pattern, consistent, pervasive, and impactful. Portia observes that the cumulative effect was a shift in the emotional and professional landscape of the set, one that affected performance, morale, and even the trajectory of careers. Every entry builds toward the inevitable realization. Meghan Markle's presence was transformative. It was not limited to her character, her performance, or her screen time. It extended into the emotional fabric of the set, influencing relationships, shaping decisions, and leaving a lasting imprint on everyone involved. Portia's diary provides the blueprint for understanding this impact. A rare, unfiltered look at the behind-the-scenes reality that no camera lens could capture. And just when it seemed the diary had revealed all it could, a final set of entries emerged that shocked even Portia. Detailed accounts of interactions, confessions from co-stars, and subtle but undeniable patterns exposed the full scope of influence, intimacy, and manipulation. These entries would ultimately challenge everything the cast believed, and set the stage for a series of revelations that could no longer be contained. The diary, in essence, became a map of power, charisma, and human dynamics, a record of how one individual's presence could shape the course of an entire production. And what comes next, as Portia himself would reflect, would prove that even the most subtle influence could have consequences far beyond the script. What exactly did these hidden diary entries reveal? Which moments, conversations, and interactions define the unspoken reality of the Suits set? And how did they finally illuminate the full scale of Meghan Markle's impact, both on the show and on everyone who worked with her? The answers lie in the next chapter, where the script itself, the lines, the staged scenes, and the unintended drama intersects with real-life secrets in ways no one anticipated. Have you ever wondered how much of what happens on a TV set is scripted, and how much is completely unscripted, hidden in plain sight? On Suits, the script was everything. Every line meticulously written, every scene carefully blocked, every emotional beat calculated. But what Aaron Portia's diary reveals is that the real drama rarely followed the printed words. Behind the lines, behind the cameras, the story was alive, chaotic, and far more revealing than any script could capture. The scripts provided the framework. They defined character arcs, legal cases, witty exchanges, and moments of romantic tension between Rachel Zane and Mike Ross. On paper, it was polished perfection. But behind the scenes, the actors' interactions often rewrote the narrative in ways no one intended. Meghan Markle, in particular, had an uncanny ability to transform ordinary moments into charged, emotionally complex scenes that were influenced by personal dynamics rather than dialogue. Portia notes in his diary that the line between performance and reality was blurred on a daily basis. Take a typical day on set. A scene called for a conversation between Rachel and another character, an argument about a case, a negotiation over legal strategy. On camera, it was textbook television. Off camera, Meghan's energy shifted the room. Subtle gestures, the inflection of her voice, or a look exchanged with a co-star could change the entire emotional tone. Actors found themselves improvising, consciously or unconsciously, responding not just to lines but to the energy, charisma, and influence of her presence. Co-stars would later confess that this blurred the boundary between acting and reality. They were performing their roles, yes, but they were also reacting to the unscripted influence that Meghan carried into every scene. One recurring actor admitted, "It wasn't just acting anymore. It was navigating her presence, her subtle cues, and making sure I didn't reveal more than I intended, on or off camera." Korsh reflected that these moments were fascinating yet terrifying. The magic of the show depended not only on the lines, but on the emotional currents Meghan stirred. And yet, the influence wasn't always overt. Sometimes it was as subtle as a prolonged gaze or a slight shift in posture. Sometimes it was in a laugh, a joke, or a carefully timed comment. The scripts were guides, but the real story, the tension, attraction, and intimacy, unfolded in the gaps between scenes, during rehearsals, and even in the quiet moments between takes. Korsh described the phenomenon as a form of unscripted magnetism, a pull that actors and crew couldn't resist and couldn't fully control. The diary details moments where scenes became unscripted experiments, shaped by personal dynamics. In one entry, Korsh recounts a courtroom scene where Meghan's engagement with a co-star turned an otherwise straightforward exchange into a charged, emotionally complex performance. The actor recalled feeling drawn in, aware that the camera was capturing not just the scripted argument, but the layered subtext created by Meghan's presence. Korsh wrote, "It was brilliant on screen, but off-screen, it was chaos, with everyone acutely aware of the underlying currents." This blending of scripted and unscripted elements became a pattern. Korsh observed that Meghan's ability to influence the tone, pace, and emotional resonance of scenes had a ripple effect on the entire production. Directors adjusted their blocking, writers reconsidered dialogue, and actors shifted performance strategies. The show's polish depended as much on managing the unscripted human drama as it did on adhering to the written lines. What made the script of Secrets so compelling and so dangerous was that it was invisible to the public. Audiences only saw the final product: Rachel Zane navigating legal cases, exchanging witty repartee, and developing a romance with Mike Ross. But behind those scenes were layers of influence, subtle manipulation, and intimate interactions that shaped the final performance. Korsh's diary reveals the complexity of these dynamics, showing how charisma and personal energy can rewrite the narrative in ways that no script can anticipate. Some co-stars admitted that navigating these dynamics was exhausting. They had to constantly recalibrate their reactions, maintain professionalism, and perform under the weight of unscripted emotional tension. The diary entries reveal that even minor gestures could escalate, that jokes could be misinterpreted, and that the subtle influence of one person could destabilize rehearsals. Korsh reflected, "I realized that controlling the script wasn't enough. I had to control the emotional environment as well." Humor, irony, and subtle sarcasm became tools for navigating the set. Actors learned to use wit to defuse tension, laughter to mask discomfort, and timing to maintain control. But Meghan's presence complicated these strategies. Her awareness of social cues, combined with charisma and strategic engagement, made her a central force in the emotional ecosystem. Co-stars found themselves both captivated and cautious, aware that every interaction carried weight beyond the scene. The diary also captures moments where unscripted interactions shaped character development. Lines were delivered differently, emotional beats shifted, and chemistry changed depending on how Meghan engaged with others. These moments weren't planned, but they became part of the performance. Korsh notes that this duality, between the written script and the unscripted reality, was both a blessing and a curse. It enhanced the show's authenticity while simultaneously creating challenges in maintaining professionalism and equilibrium. And then there were the rumors, the whispered conversations among cast and crew about personal relationships, strategic intimacy, and subtle manipulations. Some were true, some exaggerated, and some entirely misconstrued. But the presence of these rumors influenced behavior, creating a feedback loop where perception shaped reality. Korsh's diary entries document these dynamics meticulously, noting which interactions had ripple effects and how actors navigated the resulting tension. One of the most revealing entries describes a rehearsal where Meghan's engagement with multiple co-stars simultaneously created an unspoken hierarchy. Actors found themselves adjusting lines, gestures, and timing to account for subtle shifts in attention and approval. Korsh wrote, "It wasn't manipulation in a traditional sense, but her presence dictated the room. Everyone responded, consciously or unconsciously. This moment illustrates the power dynamics at play, showing how influence can reshape a creative environment without overt coercion. The script, it seems, was only part of the story. The real narrative unfolded in the interplay of personal energy, charisma, and subtle strategic engagement." Actors, crew, and directors alike had to navigate this complex web while delivering a polished, seamless final product. Korsh's diary makes it clear, understanding Suits requires looking beyond the camera, beyond the dialogue, and into the human dynamics that drove every scene. And just when it seemed the script of Secrets had revealed everything, a dramatic turning point occurred. Private moments, whispered confessions, and subtle acts of intimacy came to light, exposing dynamics that had been carefully hidden, even from Korsh at times. These moments